For decades, Hollywood legends, historians, and loyal fans of John Wayne have argued, speculated, and debated one chilling question. What really happened behind the scenes of the Duke's final years? And why was the truth kept hidden for so long? John Wayne wasn't just an actor. He was America's cowboy, a symbol of grit, strength, and rugged heroism. Generations grew up watching him tame the West, defeat impossible odds, and stand tall when the world around him crumbled. But there has always been one mystery lingering in the shadows. A mystery so uncomfortable, so unsettling, that those closest to him rarely spoke of it. And now, after years of sealed documents, withheld interviews, and missing details, new information has finally surfaced. And it isn't good. Researchers digging through archives, personal letters, and studio records have uncovered disturbing evidence about what John Wayne was facing in silence, long before he ever went public. Friends say he knew something was wrong, but he chose to hide it behind a powerful smile and an even stronger work ethic. The Duke was always larger than life, but privately, he was fighting a battle no one knew how to win. Even more shocking. There are now revelations suggesting his suffering may not have been accidental at all. In fact, newly released reports point to a dangerous environment, one that many believe contributed directly to his decline. It's a truth some studios tried to bury, a truth family members never wanted to confront, and a truth fans will struggle to accept. What investigators have finally uncovered changes everything you thought you knew about John Wayne. And once you hear the real story, you'll understand why Hollywood clung before the mystery began. John Wayne was already one of the most recognizable faces in the world. To millions, he was the embodiment of strength, the towering cowboy who never backed down, never broke character, and never showed fear. On screen, he walked with confidence, spoke with authority, and stood as a symbol of unwavering American grit. But behind that powerful image was a man carrying burdens far heavier than his fans ever realized. And the truth behind those burdens would become one of Hollywood's most disturbing secrets. By the 1960s and early 1970s, John Wayne had become more than a movie star. He was an institution. His films didn't just entertain, they shaped American identity. Parents raised their children on his stories. Soldiers watched his movies overseas for hope. Families saw him as the reliable hero in a world full of uncertainty. But as Wayne's fame grew, so did the demands placed on him. Studios expected the impossible. Directors pushed him harder. Audiences wanted him to remain forever strong, forever invincible. But the reality was far different. Behind closed doors, Wayne's health had begun to deteriorate. He battled symptoms he couldn't ignore, exhaustion, chronic pain, and moments where his strength simply vanished. But he refused to step away from the spotlight. The myth had become larger than the man, and Wayne felt obligated to protect it. His family later admitted that John was terrified, not of dying, but of disappointing the millions who believed in him. Then came the strange pattern no one could explain at first. Wayne developed unusual illnesses while filming certain movies, especially those shot in remote, rugged environments. At first, his declining health was blamed on age, stress, or the physical toll of his action-heavy roles. But whispers began to circulate on set. Crew members noticed others getting sick too, far too many for coincidence. Something wasn't right, and the mystery followed Wayne from production to production. One incident in particular left a lasting mark. During filming on a remote location, Wayne reportedly confided in a close friend that he felt poisoned by the land itself. The crew brushed it off as exhaustion, but years later, investigators would discover the shocking truth. The land wasn't just dangerous. It was contaminated. And Hollywood knew far more than they ever admitted. But at the time, Wayne didn't know any of this. He only knew that his energy was fading, his body was weakening, and the man known for unstoppable strength was beginning to crack. Yet he continued working at a grueling pace, fueled by the pressure to maintain the heroic image America clung to. He pushed through pain others would have collapsed under. He completed films when doctors begged him to rest. He hid symptoms from the press, from the studios, even from his closest friends, and still, the mystery deepened. As Wayne moved from film to film, rumors quietly spread through Hollywood. Was the Duke hiding a serious illness? Was something happening on set that the studios were covering up? Why were so many crew members from the same productions developing identical health issues in the years that followed? The questions were whispered but never investigated, until recently. Today, after decades of speculation, sealed reports and forgotten testimonies have finally emerged. These documents reveal that John Wayne wasn't just battling illness. He may have been exposed to something far more dangerous than anyone realized. Something that affected dozens of people who worked alongside him. Something that Hollywood would have preferred remain buried forever. The mystery surrounding John Wayne's final years has finally been solved. But as the truth comes to light, one thing is certain. The real story is far darker than the legend, it quiet for so long. The deeper researchers dug into John Wayne's past, the clearer a single truth became. The mystery surrounding his declining health didn't begin in the 1970s. It began decades earlier, during a film shoot that Hollywood still hesitates to talk about. A film that placed its cast and crew in the center of one of the most dangerous environments ever used for a major production. The movie was The Conqueror, a project that, on paper, seemed ambitious, exotic, and visually stunning. But in reality, it became one of Hollywood's darkest mistakes. And John Wayne was at the center of it. Filmed in 1954 in the deserts near St. George, Utah, the location appeared rugged, dramatic, and perfect for the story. What the cast didn't know, what no one told them, was that this very same land had been used by the U.S. government for nuclear testing just a few years earlier. The soil, the rocks, the dust, even the air, all carried radioactive particles. The surrounding region had already been dubbed part of the Downwinders area, known for fallout drifting across towns after weapon tests. Scientists had expressed concerns. Locals had noticed illnesses rising. But Hollywood executives moved forward anyway. John Wayne arrived eager to throw himself into the role. He brought his children, believing the wide-open landscape was safe, maybe even healthy. Crew members set up camp. Extras gathered, animals were brought in. And for weeks they breathed the air, worked in the dust and touched the ground, completely unaware that every hour spent there increased their exposure. The danger wasn't dramatic, immediate, or visible. It was slow, silent, and devastating. Years later, when researchers compiled data, a horrifying pattern emerged. Of the 220 cast and crew members who worked on the Conqueror, nearly half would later develop cancer. Dozens would die from it, and John Wayne was one of the most famous among them. Wayne's doctors would later suggest that his cancer could have been caused by smoking, genetics, or age. But the numbers didn't lie. The sheer concentration of illness from that single film shoot was too severe to ignore. And while Hollywood avoided admitting responsibility, insiders knew the truth. That land had been contaminated. Severely. But the real mystery wasn't just the radioactive ground. It was the silence. Why didn't anyone warn the cast? Why didn't the government step in? Why did studios risk hundreds of lives for the sake of a movie? The newly uncovered documents paint a grim picture. According to government memos from the era, fallout levels were known to be dangerous. Reports indicate officials were aware that the region was still hot, meaning radioactive particles remained active in the soil and air. Yet no warnings were issued to filmmakers. Even worse, when The Conqueror returned to Hollywood for reshoots, the studio shipped 60 tons of contaminated dirt back to the set so they could recreate the original landscape. No one questioned this. No one suspected the danger. Actors worked with it. Technicians shoveled it. John Wayne himself spent hours filming in that radioactive soil. If the fallout near St. George didn't seal their fate, the imported radioactive earth did. The tragedy grew even darker when, years later, Wayne heard whispers about the contamination. He reportedly dismissed the idea at first. His belief in American institutions was too strong. He couldn't accept that he and his colleagues had been placed in such danger. But by the time evidence became undeniable, it was far too late. The damage had already been done. Hollywood never officially acknowledged liability. The government never apologized. Families were left with grief, unanswered questions, and a lifelong sense of injustice. And John Wayne, the hero millions adored, became one of the most tragic victims of a disaster that should have never happened. That's the secret hidden for decades. That's the truth, Hollywood. Hoped would fade with time, but the mystery doesn't end there. What happened next would push Wayne into a battle no cowboy, no matter how strong, could ever win. By the time John Wayne entered the 1960s, the damage from the conqueror was already inside him, quiet, unseen, and progressively tightening its grip. But to the outside world, he was still the Duke, strong, commanding, unstoppable. And that's exactly how Wayne wanted it. He refused to let anyone, fans, studios, or even his own family, see the cracks forming. Hollywood was changing. The world was changing. But Wayne wanted to stay the symbol he had always been, a pillar for audiences who believed in the values he represented: toughness, patriotism, resilience. Admitting weakness felt like betraying all of that. So he hid the pain. He smiled through exhaustion. He performed through discomfort no one else could have endured. Then came the diagnosis, the word he feared, the word he thought he could outrun: cancer. Doctors found a tumor in his lung, aggressive, advanced, and requiring immediate surgery. When they delivered the news, Wayne remained stoic, but privately the truth terrified him. Not because he feared death, but because he feared disappointing the millions who believed he was invincible. He insisted that the operation be handled quietly. No public announcements, no alarming headlines. He wanted to return to work as soon as possible, pretending nothing had changed. And unbelievably, after losing an entire lung, John Wayne did exactly that. Just months after a life-altering surgery, he walked back onto a movie set, breathless, weak and in constant pain, yet determined not to let anyone see it. Producers offered to reduce his scenes. Directors offered to rewrite the physical stunts. Wayne refused. He would not let cancer define him, but privately the battle raged. His stamina was slipping. His voice weakened. His iconic walk became noticeably strained. Family members later recalled moments when he would collapse into a chair, pretending he just needed a minute, when in reality he was hiding stabbing pain that never went away. He began researching the radiation fallout he had once dismissed. He asked former colleagues about their health. Slowly, a horrifying realization formed: he was not alone. Co-stars, stuntmen, extras, camera operators. Many were sick, some dying. The pattern was undeniable, and it devastated him. Wayne blamed himself for encouraging others to join the production. He blamed the studios for staying silent. He blamed the government for ignoring the fallout data. But most of all, he struggled with the reality that even a man as powerful, respected, and iconic as he was, had been rendered helpless by a danger hidden from him. Yet Wayne still refused to speak publicly about it. He didn't want anger or controversy to define his legacy. Instead, he pushed forward, filming some of the most memorable roles of his later career. Even as cancer quietly spread through his body, friends saw the toll it took on him. He slept less. He worked slower. He carried emotional weight he never fully expressed. But every time a camera rolled, he became John Wayne again, the fearless cowboy, the unbreakable leader, the man audiences knew and loved. That was his greatest struggle, the gap between the legend and the human being behind it. And as the years went on, that gap widened until it became impossible to hide. Wayne's body was reaching its limit. His illness was advancing, and the public was finally beginning to notice that something was terribly wrong. But the most heartbreaking part of the story was still to come, because even after everything he endured, the truth of what happened to John Wayne would not be fully revealed until after he was gone. As John Wayne pushed through the final decade of his career, the cracks in his health were no longer entirely invisible. He moved slower, breathed heavier, and relied increasingly on sheer willpower rather than physical strength. Still, he refused to stop working. The Duke believed that legends don't retire. They ride until the very end. But behind the cameras, something far more troubling was happening. Investigators, doctors, and even journalists were quietly piecing together a truth that would shake Hollywood to its core. While Wayne was fighting to keep the myth alive, Others were beginning to see a pattern, one that couldn't be ignored. Former cast members from The Conqueror were falling sick at alarming rates. Publicists tried to downplay it. Studios brushed it off as coincidence. But families of the victims knew something was deeply wrong. Then, in the late 1970s, a group of independent researchers compiled data on everyone involved in the film. When the final report came in, the results were horrifying. Dozens of cancers. Many deaths. The statistical odds were impossible to dismiss. What happened in that desert was not chance. It was exposure. This was the truth. The Conqueror had been filmed directly downwind from one of the largest nuclear test sites in American history. The radioactive fallout had blanketed the soil. It settled on the rocks. It traveled through the wind, and the cast breathed it, swallowed it, and worked in it for weeks. Worse still, government records later revealed that the risks were known. Fallout maps were documented. Radiation levels were measured. Concerns were raised internally, yet no warnings were ever passed to the filmmakers. No one was told the truth. The production continued, because stopping it would have been expensive, embarrassing, or politically inconvenient. Hollywood locked the truth away, the government buried the evidence, and John Wayne and hundreds of others paid the price. The revelation didn't go public immediately. Studios feared lawsuits. Agencies feared scandal, and Wayne himself was conflicted. He hated being the center of controversy, and he refused to portray himself as a victim. It wasn't in his nature, but privately the truth haunted him. Friends recall moments near the end of his life when Wayne would express regret. Not for his choices, but for the people who worked under him, extras, horse handlers, stuntmen, young actors who had trusted the environment to be safe. Some of them had died far earlier than he did. And Wayne, despite his enormous fame, felt powerless to right the wrong. His children later acknowledged that Wayne finally accepted the reality he had once dismissed. The radiation didn't just touch his life, it consumed it. When asked directly if the Conqueror contributed to his illness, Wayne once paused, looked down, and answered softly, "There's a good chance." It was the closest he ever came to publicly admitting the truth. After Wayne's death in 1979, journalists picked up the story. Details leaked. Former crew members spoke out. Unreleased documents were uncovered, and the world slowly realized that Hollywood's heroic cowboy had been a victim of one of the largest environmental failures in American entertainment history. But even then, the controversy was downplayed. Some critics claimed Wayne's smoking was to blame. Others argued the numbers weren't definitive. Yet the families of the fallen knew better. The pattern was undeniable. The illness was widespread. The location was toxic. And the silence, long, deliberate, and calculated, was devastating. The saddest chapter of the mystery is this. John Wayne never sought revenge, compensation, or vengeance. He simply accepted his fate, carried it with dignity, and continued working until his body could no longer endure the burden. He chose to protect his legacy, even when the truth threatened to overshadow it. And that legacy of bravery, loyalty, and unwavering strength remains untouched, even by the tragedy that ultimately claimed him. But now, with the truth fully uncovered, the real story stands clear. John Wayne wasn't just a symbol of American courage on screen. He was a man who quietly endured one of Hollywood's darkest injustices, an injustice caused not by enemies, but by silence,